Hello everyone, this is episode 3 of my video journal series. Today's date is the 11th of February 2026. I'm recording this around 9:30ish, and something that's been on my mind today are English exams. Now, I haven't done an English exam in quite a while, since I was in high school, in fact, for the HSC. But I always have memories of doing English exams, and I never really got the point of it. Like, you have to just write essays, basically, just analyzing techniques, quotes, obviously to a specific question, like how does T.S. Eliot explain misery and despair within, I don't know, the wasteland or something, and you got to write like a full-on essay analyzing that. And unless you're like willing to become an author or an analyst, I don't understand why you need essay writing skills to carry on in the workforce. It's not like if you go for like an apprenticeship, they ask you like for a tradie, for an engineer, plumber, they ask you, analyze how George Orwell summarizes human ontological struggles against the, authoritarian government in 1984. Like, I'm not going to ask you that question. That could, like, just be something that they might ask you when you, I don't know, apply to become a analyst, an English analyst. If that isn't a job, it should be basically someone who analyzes English essays for a living and does nothing else. Maybe that's just the role of a high school teacher, but I've always found high school essays just to be boring. Like, you just, I don't really get the point of them. You just write, like, all right, you got your topic sentence, right? Basically stating your point, then you got your elaboration, evidence, context, and then you got the final statement paragraph. And I never really got the point. Like, why are we analyzing texts, but we're not allowed to critique them? We're not allowed to analyze any deeper meaning. Instead, it's just like, Eliot uses X technique to willfully explore this, or to willfully do this, or excellently do that. It's just, I don't really sort of get it. Like, isn't the point of an English text to basically critique it, recommend, some improvements to it, analyzing what it's done good, what it's done bad? English essays aren't really like that. They're just more like you're just complimenting the author, which isn't a bad thing, but that's all it is. You're just like analyzing that. You're not even really linking it as much to contemporary themes as you should. You're just pretty much just saying, oh, this technique does that, this piece of quote means this piece of evidence means that. You're not really critically analyzing it as much as teachers say you should be. And look, whenever I did English essays in high school, I always, wrote pre-prepared statements or pre-prepared paragraphs. And I, like, that just kills sort of the creativity. I know you have to do that, so then you go into the exam with like at least the base response that you've already got written. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of kids, including myself at one point, just remember their entire pre-prepared off by heart, and I feel that just kills a little bit of creativity. It's like we can't really have creative thought in English classrooms. It's pretty much the teacher says you to do this, you do this, Tell you to do that, you do that. And I think that just comes down to how English is formatted, at least in, Australian schools. I don't know if overseas they do a little bit differently, but it's pretty much the same format. You write essays, you incorporate quotes and all that, and it's quite boring. I think English class should be, critically analyzing literature, highlighting flaws, highlighting its success, complimenting, criticizing authors. It shouldn't just be pure analysis, I feel like, and I, that's just my opinion of it, and another thing, like, I just want to add, is that I don't really hate English. In fact, I actually really like English. even though I haven't done it in a while. I still like reading books, writing stuff. It's just that I feel like the way I've been taught to analyze stuff in English has like killed off a little bit of my interest in reading books because we were forced to do Shakespeare, T.S. Eliot when I was in at least senior year of high school, and I just found those to be boring. But now I find them to be a little bit interesting because I've left school. I think everyone else can agree that once you leave school, these texts suddenly become a little bit more interesting because you're not forced to learn about them, And I've always thought, like to revisit some of these texts, that I've read in high school. One of my favorites was Othello from year 11. I thought that was actually a very good Shakespearean text. It was actually most probably my most favorite Shakespearean text that we learnt in the entirety of high school. At least for me, that was. I knew some people who didn't really like it, but in my opinion, it was the best because I think it was the only one I could understand really, even with the simple English um, version. Because I remember our school forced us to read the Shakespearean version, but I bought an extra copy from Amazon that had the simple English translation. So maybe that's why I did well. Because the rest of the Shakespearean text we learned about in high school, we practically had to learn Shakespearean, which is no kid's willing to do that practically. But no, I really enjoyed Othello. I knew a lot of kids who like 1984, and look, I respect 1984. I thought it was an interesting book, but to be fair, I didn't really get it much into it as other people did. Um, but I thought Animal Farm, which we did in year 11, I thought that was pretty good because it was a very short novel. It was only around like 100 pages or so. So, it was a nice, short and sweet. I think the symbolism in that book were very creative. So I'll give George Orwell the point for that one. But another thing that's on my mind is when you do like an English essay, they'll always give you like 5 minutes of reading time, which is basically when you flip over the booklet and you look at the question and you're basically like, all right, here's a question. I already got my pre-prepared response in my head. And then you can't do anything. You just got to read that question. You got to sit there on the table reading that question and like, all right, I think I can get like an answer to this. But you're not allowed to write anything. You're not allowed to plan anything on a separate sheet of paper, and like that always annoyed me because I remember for other exams and like other subjects, you always like some of them gave you planning time, which was basically 5 minutes. You read the question, and on an extra sheet of paper, you get to write down all your quotes, analysis techniques. I remember legal studies, they allowed us to do that, I think, for some of them. And it just made me confused. Like, why do some exams have planning time and other ones don't? If you ask me, reading time should just be fully changed out, fully abolished for planning time, which is basically reading time. You get to read the question, but you also get to write down all the quotes that you have in your head. Because I'm sure anyone who's done an exam with 5 minutes reading time would know that like you can't like do anything. What are you supposed to just look at the question for 5 minutes? Like, you're not allowed to plot down anything. And the first thing I always do in an exam, English exam, well, at least in high school, the first thing I did in English, legal studies, modern history, ancient history, was always writing down my quotes and evidence on like a spare sheet of paper on the back of the paper, just so then I can get it all out of my mind and focus on the questions. Because you don't want to be in the middle of a question and suddenly forget like a quote or piece of evidence. It's just the worst thing. And especially in English, you can't make up your quotes. I remember legal studies, you could sort of make up article names if you did it really well. I didn't, obviously. I always used real articles for that. But with English, if you forget a quote, you can most probably put in parentheses, but it's not going to come out that good. You never make up English quotes when doing an exam. And yeah, I always thought that it's kind of outdated and it's kind of rigged if they only allow us 5 minutes of reading time, but they don't allow us to just plan everything out. It's not like you're cheating or anything. You're just basically getting all the knowledge out of your head. before you just hit the question. And, it's like the first 5 minutes of the exam is already me writing down the plan. So I already waste 5 minutes of valuable writing time in an essay, short answer section. I already lost 5 minutes just trying to like plot down my essay structure. And then you most probably got to do, all the multiple choice questions, all the short answer questions. And some of the short answer questions, they actually are worth quite a few marks, like upwards of 5 or 8 marks. So, you got to create a plan for them also. And that 5 minutes reading time, you also got to use for the short answer questions if an essay were to have that section. Sometimes they give you like 5 or 10 minutes, but still, you got to look at the other questions, which are worth, quite a fair bit on its own. And yeah, it's just, I think the whole thing's a mess. I think planning time should be adopted universally, at least across schools in Australia. And that I really never got on the point of English essays. What's the point if you write an essay and then you're never going to publish it? Like, you pretty much, the teacher only sees it, you only sees it, then you just like throw it away. And you're just pretty much analyzing techniques that you're most probably not going to use later on in your future careers. Um, yeah, and that's just what's been on my mind today. But I guess I'll see you next time, or tomorrow, I should say, and have a great one.